The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
Listeners of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, I bring to you the pre-order for the 2018 Matt Talk Online NCAA Division I Fan Guide, the digital preview guide that's over 200 pages of facts, stats, results. If there is a result that happened in NCAA wrestling and that wrestler is in the NCAA Division I championships coming up in Cleveland, I guarantee you that result will be in the guide. Save yourself $5 by using the offer code podcast. Go to matttalkonline.com/fanguide18. Click the I want this button. Click order now, pre-order. It'll be digitally delivered to your inbox on March 13th, maybe even a skosh earlier. Over 200 pages of facts, stats, results. I stake my reputation on the claim that this is the single greatest thing that will add to your knowledge and experience at the NCAA championships. Everything you want to know about 330 wrestlers and all the teams competing, available. matttalkonline.com/fanguide18. Use the offer code podcast. Save yourself $5. It is a short-time listener exclusive. This is the product that ESPN and all the Mad Side broadcasters use, their production truck, their broadcasters. You name it, it's in there. Facts, stats, again, I've said results, pub trivia, all-American lists. You find out all these things from the NCAA championships. I could go on for an entire show about it, but right now, I'm just going to say, matttalkonline.com/fanguide18, offer code podcast. You will not be disappointed. And once again, wrestling fans, welcome back to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Bryant. Here on this show, news, reviews, previews, and interviews with the most interesting names and notable personalities in wrestling. One of those personalities is joining us today. It's Mike Couzens. It's not my cousin or your cousin. His name is Mike Couzens. He is the play-by-play voice for the NCAA Division I Wrestling Championships coming up this year in Cleveland with his second year on the gig, and you'll hear him with Anthony Robles and Tim Johnson. Mike, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. I apologize that you're going to now have to change the header to the podcast to also include the least interesting people in wrestling now that you've had me as a guest.
We're trying to change that, and part of our world in the media world is we're supposed to change the narrative so the fans can get interested, right?
That's right. Yeah. So now you're at all ends of the spectrum in wrestling.
So let's just jump right into it. When you get the assignment last year, because Adam Amin, who had been on this show before, talking about what it was to call the NCAA Wrestling Championships, when they approach you, when ESPN approaches you to say, all right, we want, you're going to be the guy for Division I's in St. Louis, what's your reaction?
Well, it was an interesting way that it happened. I was at home, and it was a weekday, and I was getting ready for whatever my next basketball game happened to be because it was in January of that year. And I just got a text message from one of the coordinating producers who works on the sport and said, "Do you know anything about wrestling?" And so I start to think back to you get advice from other people throughout the business, and they say, well, if anybody ever asks you to do anything and you don't know how to do it, just say yes and then figure it out after the fact. So I responded and said, no, I don't know anything about wrestling, but I'd be happy to learn. And pretty much with that, I moved into Adam's seat as the play-by-play announcer for NCAA wrestling. So it was at the time, I didn't know anything about wrestling, and so it was kind of a crash course from mid-January to mid-March last year, leading up to St. Louis. But yeah, I was fortunate that I was somebody who got considered as Adam's career has skyrocketed, and now he's doing Major League Baseball and the NBA. And I was the next guy in line, and was willing and happy to start learning about what I've discovered is a really awesome sport.
How quickly did you call him and be like, "Hey, dude, what do I do here?"
It was pretty fast. Fortunately, at the time, I was living in Chicago, and Adam is a native of Chicago and still lives there. And so if anybody is familiar with following Adam on social media, he's very fond of tacos. So I treated Adam to lunch at a taco spot just about in between our two apartment buildings. And we sat down, and he went through everything and showed me his old files and showed me where to find stats and what websites to follow and where the rankings are online. And that was kind of my crash course, was lunch over tacos and wrestling with Adam.
It makes so much sense now that you brought up the taco thing, because he was, where I live in the Twin Cities is about a 3.5 hour run, 3 hours, 15 minutes if you're hauling to get to Fargo, which is where they host the Junior Nationals every year. And beginning of the year, I think it was last year, he's asking for food recommendations for Fargo. And I'm like, because he's got the broadcaster, I'm like, dude, Herd and Horns, try the street tacos. Apparently that's what sucked him in. It wasn't my recommendation. It was the fact that I said the word tacos.
It's a really good 4-letter word.
Yeah, because those are things as broadcasters we're not supposed to do. Well, we're going to circle back to the wrestling part of this in a bit, but I'm curious on your backstory, because as many who desire to be in broadcasting and journalism, there's a couple schools that you kind of eye for that type of career. If you're into the journalism, usually the University of Missouri is kind of at the top of the list. Broadcasting, Syracuse, which was one of my final choices, ultimately was your alma mater, your opportunity to go there. Was the broadcasting part of it why you chose Syracuse?
It was. So the quick backstory on me getting interested in broadcasting was growing up. I grew up just north of New York City in a city called White Plains, New York. And we did not have cable TV when I was growing up. And so the thing that I always did was listen to the radio. And I always listened to WFAN 66 AM. So it was Don Imus in the morning and Mike and the Mad Dog in the afternoon. And then at night, it was New York Mets games. And so I'd come home from school and finish up my homework really quickly and just kind of sit there and listen to baseball on the radio. And it was never so much that I thought, oh man, I'd really love to do play-by-play. It was more so the aspect of getting paid to go watch a sporting event and the appeal of a huge and excited crowd. So it was kind of a combination of those two things. And then I think the third part too was I always did decently in school, but the biggest demerit on my report card would always be scores well on tests, talks a little bit too much. So then I was like, well, if I can get paid to do that one day, that would be pretty cool. So Syracuse, actually, in the life advice that I would not give to high school students, was the only school that I applied to. So I wouldn't ever tell anyone you should apply to one school. But it worked out well in that sense that I applied early, got in early, and knew that was what I wanted to do. So I started out, actually, I played high school basketball and was a basketball manager my freshman year at Syracuse, and realized that filling up water cups and rebounding basketballs wasn't entirely what I wanted to do. So I was partly involved in student media my freshman year, and then worked at both campus radio stations throughout the rest of my college career, and spent a lot more time on that than I did on anything academically related. And fortunately, no one since has ever asked to see my diploma or what my GPA was. So I think I made a good choice.
Yeah, I'm with you there, because, when you have it in your mind that you know what you want to do. I mean, I told this to Adam last year when he was on the show that, when you're in the niche and you're doing a lot of announcing and people are like, oh, yeah, you're going to be on ESPN one day when you're a kid, you kind of get that in your mind. And, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm not going to this, insert school name here for the experience. I'm here to get the degree because I'm already ahead of everybody else when it came to the experience. And, of course, coming out of Syracuse, it's super competitive in terms of, getting a radio job. That's one reason I didn't choose to go to Syracuse. One was the cost. Two, when I went and visited, it snowed 2 feet. And being from Virginia Beach, that area, that's not really in my wheelhouse. And three, there was a super competitive attitude on just trying to get into the student media. What did you experience as far as the competition, just to be one of these people that's like, I'm going to be on the radio at Syracuse?
It's definitely true. And I think that is part of what makes the people who graduate from there be successful, because, and it's not to say that the academic environment at Syracuse or at the Newhouse School, which is the communication school, is not good, because it trains you well, but it doesn't necessarily train you to be a good play-by-play announcer or a good television host. It trains you classically how to be a good journalist, how to be skeptical, how to ask good open-ended questions, how to, if you want to go into news, how are you going to search an open records database, to do those things that are good in any line of work that you go into. But as far as specifically student media goes, you have so many people who want to get into it. And the way that you actually get meaningful time on the air is to bust your tail and do more work than the other people. So the way that you get your reward is by outworking everybody else. So you get weeded out in a sense. So for one of the stations, WAER, which is probably the most prominent there, to start even getting critiqued to get on the air, you have to show up once a week at 5 a.m. and do a sportscast that never airs anywhere. When I was doing it in 2007, we were still using cassettes. And then you would bring that in the next week, get it critiqued, and come back and keep doing that until you finally got good enough to make it on the air. So it's a process where you have so many people who know exactly what they want to do, and the competition among each other is what makes everybody better.
Do you think for those that want to get into the industry, that's something that they're missing? They might watch ESPN or Big Ten Network or Insert Sports Network here and be like, I can do that. And they just say, oh, I want to be, they show up to a college radio station or a local radio station. Yeah, I know a lot about this. I want to be on the air.
Yeah, and I find that sometimes is a difficult thing to get across, because there are, and I will freely admit, like, I am not a sports encyclopedia. There are a ton of people who are going to be sitting at home in any sport that I'm doing, whether it's wrestling, football, basketball, baseball, who are going to know more about the history of the sport or about the team. Of course, I'm not going to know 100% more about the team that I'm calling than the biggest fan of that team, but it's not necessarily just having sports knowledge, but there's a lot that goes into it, whether it's engaging an analyst or how you get in and out of stories, or can you inject humor and information into the broadcast. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And two is, there's a long winding path to get to being on a Big Ten network or on ESPN or whatever network it is, because I'm 29 years old and I have been exceptionally fortunate in terms of the breaks that have come my way in the 7 or 8 years that I've been out of college. So what I've done has been very fast, relatively speaking, to other people in the industry, who, a lot of which, I have colleagues who've been doing sports television for longer than I've been alive. So I always, when I go back and speak to kids at Syracuse, I say, look, is it possible to replicate what I've done? Yes. Is it likely? No, but you're not going to get the chances unless you work hard enough to create that opportunity for yourself.
Yeah, I've seen the course of various kids who've come through at Old Dominion at WODU. When I showed up as a freshman, boom, I'm part of the radio station, and I didn't get a whole lot of airtime that first year because we had some seniors, and I was part of that whole pay your dues thing. I mean, I was learning how to run a board. I was learning how to cut carts. So you're talking about cassettes. I'm talking about cart machines and things of that nature. It was kind of on the way out. But, I'm watching one of the guys that came through, I think his name's Brian Gardner. He came through, and now he's doing like Radford University, and he's gone these small little single A and double A baseball games. I mean, you can have the opportunity to end up in some real small towns in some different places. Your career, you've gone from, Vermont, Dayton, Ohio, Fort Wayne. I mean, you could be in another one horse town along the way just because you love the passion of broadcasting. But what was ultimately the moment that led you to get the opportunity to work for ESPN?
I was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, working for one of those single A baseball teams with a great organization. Some of the people there are still some of my best friends that I've ever met. But one of the things that led me to want to take that job was that it was one of just 5 teams of almost 150 in minor league baseball that televised all of their home games. So I said, well, this is a really good opportunity to get experience doing live television. And I would send that tape out to anybody who would watch it, other broadcasters, relatives, people I used to work for, whoever would look at it. And the person who really helped me out was a guy by the name of Bill Roth, who was for about a quarter of a century the play-by-play announcer at Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech, yep, no Bill Roth. I know Bill Roth. I know that voice anywhere.
Yeah, the longtime voice of the Hokies, who's now back there, and he's teaching the next generation of broadcasters. And so I sent him my tape, my baseball TV tape, and he said, well, I did baseball, but it was about 20 years ago, so let me give this to somebody else who was his producer at ESPN, who then passed it along to the people at ESPN3. And this was maybe July of 2012. And they said, okay, well, it's good, but, we don't have anything right now, so if anything pops up, we'll let you know. So I said, okay, well, that's good. I've done as much as I can. And then out of the blue one day in November of 2012, I got an email asking if I could do a couple ESPN3 basketball games at the University of Wisconsin. And when I got that email, my first inclination was to tell them, you guys know I've never done any basketball on TV. And my second was, and which I actually did respond enthusiastically, yes, I can be there. When do you need me? And so I did a couple of those games, stumbled my way through them to the point where I got asked the next summer to take charge of the high school basketball project that they had in terms of summer AAU tournaments, which then led into a full season of high school basketball, which then led to filling in for college basketball. Ironically, or I should say coincidentally, one of the first college games I did was at the University of Iowa at Carver Hawkeye Arena. So it all comes full circle, I guess. And so just being the right guy in the right place at the right time was a huge part of it. And then I freelanced for a couple of years. And then a couple guys left. Joe Davis, who's the voice of the Dodgers now, left ESPN to go work for Fox. Carter Blackburn, who does the NCAA tournament for CBS, left ESPN for CBS. And I was, again, the right guy at the right time, and I got hired full time. And things have continued to go well ever since. So, I got a lucky break, and other people left at the right time, and I was kind of the next guy in line. So, I could have been the right guy, but at the wrong time, and still been doing minor league baseball. It's just it's interesting to see how much luck is a factor in so many things.
Is it sometimes hard to sit there and look at a broadcaster? You might be flipping through and you're watching a game, and there'd be some broadcasters that you've never heard of before, and you, on one hand, you might, man, that guy's really good, he should be up here, or you'll look at a bigger network, or why is that guy up here? The guy down here is even better. I mean, it's all about taste also, and like you said, the right time. How do you handle that type of maybe critiques that you get from fans, both positive and negative?
Well, the funny part about that is I cannot, with my fiance, she will mostly refuse to watch sports television with me because I don't really necessarily pay attention to the score, but I'm more so listening to the dialogue between the play-by-play and the analyst. And so it's sports on television are just going to be different for me for the rest of my life. And I'm assuming most other announcers are that way too. During a game, there's always going to be people who are displeased with what you do because they think that you're biased one way or another, but that's always going to be the case because I'm not there to say that each team is the greatest team in the history of ever. I'm going to be critical. I'm going to be honest. And so if people don't like that, that's okay. But I also have to realize that, when people are reaching out to you on Twitter, no one's ever reaching out, or at least 99.9% of people are not reaching out to say, hey, you did a nice job calling that 3-pointer. But they're more likely to say, hey, you're biased, and why do you hate such and such? And you realize that comes with the territory. The other part of it, too, is, I do watch stuff, and I think, hey, this guy's really good, or, this guy could really be doing it at a higher level. And so I think it's a great way to keep perspective of knowing that, we're all only here as placeholders because in 1986, there were people who were on ESPN and they were calling college football, and now I'm in that space. And in 2036, in whatever form sports broadcasting exists, there's going to be other people who are doing it and it's going to not be me anymore. So you just have to realize that you're lucky to have the opportunity because we're all here because there's somebody higher up the chain who likes what we do. But if that person wasn't there anymore and somebody else new came in and they didn't like what I do, I could be out of the job tomorrow. It's all subjective. So it makes you realize that you're fortunate to do what you do and get paid to talk about sports. And when you think about it in that sense, it's kind of ridiculous, but I feel grateful to be where I am.
You talked about listening to WFAN and radio growing up, and that's one thing that seems to be a common theme in everybody that I've talked to over the years, whether it be the local broadcasters I grew up listening to, or talking about how they got their job in television. It seemed like everybody would always circle back to loving listening to sports on the radio. With the generation that's coming through now, do you think that's kind of a lost art with so much on demand and people staring into their phones and watching games on Twitter? I mean, the radio broadcast at night seems to be really what blossomed a lot of broadcasters' careers. Now it's maybe fallen out of favor.
I do think that a lot of people are going to be missing out on that. Like, I think the best $20 I spend every year is for the MLB at Bat app and the live radio package, where literally for $20 a year, you get access to every radio feed home and away of all the Major League Baseball games. And that's one of the more fun things to do. If I'm out grilling chicken on a Thursday night or whatever in July, to just throw on a game. I love listening to the San Francisco Giants games, the Boston Red Sox. And, I grew up a Mets fan, but I like to bounce around. And I think that provides a great foundation for good play-by-play, whether it's TV or radio, is having started in TV, because you have to come up with all the descriptive ways to talk about things. And now where you can look at your phone and in 30 seconds know who won a game, in 90 seconds you can have watched all the major highlights of that. I do worry that maybe the next generation doesn't love radio as much, and that's the true craft of it, is finding new ways to say things and finding ways to fill time. I can't begin to describe the number of times during a game where, there might be, let's say it's blood time, right? You got to come up with something to fill that time. Or I did a basketball game at Marquette 3 or 4 years ago where there were bats in the gym, and we had a 15-minute stoppage, and having to do solo minor league baseball on the radio where you are responsible for filling at a minimum 3 hours of airtime every day. That is a great way to learn how to be ready to react to any situation in the future. And so I hope that people who are younger than me and getting into this still do listen to the radio, because it's the truest form of the craft of play-by-play.
You talked about when you were calling a game, you would sit there and you'd give honest feedback. And how do you do that with a sport you don't have much experience with? I trust that you know the game of basketball well enough based on your, playing it in high school and being around a program like Syracuse. But, you don't step on a wrestling mat. How does the play-by-play guy offer that type of maybe pitch to the color guy without really fully understanding everything there is, that maybe the nuance behind that position?
I'm fortunate in that, working with Anthony, he's been doing the tournament for a while, and he brings one perspective of having been on the mat. And then working with Tim, who's doing the biggest matches throughout the course of the year as a play-by-play announcer on BTN, and then steps into the analyst role for the NCAA tournament. So I pick their brain a lot, and I will ask our production crew of, what's expected out of me, and watching a lot of other matches too throughout the course of the year to figure out what's the best way that I can do it. Sean Kenny, who works on the NCAA tournament and does duels throughout the year as well on ESPN, to pick his brain and see how he does it, and try and make it my own style. And, I freely admit that I'm not going to sit down for a wrestling match and know exactly every term of every move and exactly being able to describe that to the degree that more experienced people are. But my hope is that with a 3-person booth, you've got myself, who's going to bring you the storylines of what's happening and set the stage for you, and Anthony, who's going to be able to break things down technically, and Tim, who can help fill in the rest. And then, in between sessions, to ask those guys, hey, is there anything else you would want differently from me, or anything else differently that I can bring to the table? And so to do it in the best way that I can do it, but not try to be something that I'm not and pretend that I'm a technical expert with wrestling, because especially with a fan base as dialed in as this sport, I'd be instantly exposed as a fraud. So I do the best that I can do and try and grow from year to year.
One thing about the production team at the NCAA championships is there's a guy in the truck that knows wrestling. His name's Jerry Daniels. He's had the opportunity to work with him as I was a stats gopher for ESPN back in 2008, 2009. And then throughout the course, our relationship has been pretty positive. And when you and Adam needed something, I'd get a call from Jerry, hey, can we do something? But what's it mean to have a guy that knows a niche sport? And let's be honest, folks, those listening, that as much as we want wrestling to be mainstream, yeah, we got to embrace that niche. We are a niche sport. We are not something that's, I'd love to see highlights on SportsCenter, especially with what happened the other night with Kyle Snyder and Adam Kuhn. But you need those experts in those niches. And Jerry's a guy that knows enough about producing, sports, and he brings a wrestling knowledge to it. What was it like stepping into the truck and working with him for the first time last year for wrestling?
It's an invaluable resource to have somebody like that. JD, as he's better known around campus in Bristol, was just so immensely helpful to me. I was actually up in Bristol, I want to say sometime January or February of last year before going to St. Louis, and we sat down in the cafeteria, and he laid out for me, here's how the weekend's going to go. If you need anything, I'm here for you. And then throughout the course of the weekend, to just have him be able to pop on the headset and say, hey, you might want to check with Tim and Anthony about these things and set them up for this kind of a point. Or, hey, keep an eye on this team because they're surging in the point total. Just things that you may not, especially as a first-time announcer, have a good grasp for because you don't know what you don't know. And it's amazing. I think that that's something that people should know too about the production value that goes into this. Is it's an NCAA championship, and I think it's treated equally by ESPN because now we're in the day and age where the state of broadcasting is that a lot of things are done remotely. Where if people don't know that for football and basketball and other sports, that there's not always a production truck at the venue anymore, and the announcers may go, but the production crew might be back in Bristol or they might be in Charlotte because it saves a lot of money to do things that way. But in the NCAA Wrestling Championship, there is a production village underneath the stadium, and there are multiple trucks for multiple feeds because you not only have the feed on whether it's ESPN or ESPN2, but you also have the ESPN3 coverage. And so there is so much that goes on and so many resources dedicated to this by ESPN that it's fun to be a part of, and it's an honor to be a part of it because of how much dedication is given to the championship of the sport.
Yeah, you had mentioned Sean Kenny, who did a pretty good job. I'd say a better than pretty good job calling the Michigan-Ohio State match the other night with Anthony Robles. And, with Anthony, you'd mentioned him. We've touched on him in a bit. When he stepped into this role, he didn't have a whole lot of experience. And then now between his work with the Pac-12 network and ESPN, he's a guy that he's comfortable on camera. He's a great public speaker. He has just really blossomed into one of our sport's best color commentators when it comes to it. I mean, who would you kind of compare him to maybe in your travels regarding what Anthony Robles does for wrestling that you may have seen somebody else do for basketball or football or baseball?
If I'm thinking of somebody who's a great ambassador for the sport, if I think to college baseball, there's the guy I'm thinking of is Mike Rooney. Was a coach. He was a player at Notre Dame. Was a coach at Arizona State, and he is just like a fountain of knowledge and enthusiasm in an NCAA championship in terms of being a prominent athlete. But he's somebody who just oozes the love of the sport, and it comes across very clearly. There's another guy, too, who has only started to be an analyst this year for ESPN by the name of Robbie Hummel for college basketball. And he has done Big Ten. He's done maybe the SEC this year, but a guy who just has gone right from being a player where he was a pro overseas to jumping in as an analyst. And you can tell it's somebody who, to be a good coach, you don't necessarily have to have been a good athlete. And to be a good analyst, it doesn't necessarily mean that you were great at the sport, but to be great at the sport and then to be able to jump in and also be a good analyst and explain how to do things at a high level to people who may have never played the sport, I think that's really hard to do. And Anthony does it in a way where it's easy to understand whether you are the biggest wrestling fan or somebody who, like a good portion of the audience, as I imagine each year, is flipping through ESPN and goes, hey, holy cow, I didn't realize that the wrestling championships were this weekend. I'm going to stick around. And he's somebody who helps you understand the sport. That's another aspect, too, that I hope that people pick up on throughout the course of the weekend is that, and I'm sure it's been a complaint before, and I certainly understand it as well, is that sometimes, whether graphically or verbally, we will explain the very basics of wrestling. What's a major decision versus a tech fall? What's a takedown worth versus what's an escape worth? And so there are probably people who go, hey, we know wrestling. We don't need to know that. But at the same time, if the show is on ESPN, it's available in more than 90 million homes. So there might be a lot of people who don't understand that. So you have to find a happy medium between somebody who's an expert at the sport and then people who may never have watched before.
Yeah, and I guess the comparison to that was, well, you don't say basketball's 2 points. Well, I'd say those 90 million homes understand the concept of basketball since it's kind of a mainstream sport.
Right, and I get that. And so, to the point of, people who are critical because they say you're biased in favor of one team or another, you're never going to please everybody. Your hope is that you educate people, you inform them, you entertain them, and that if you can do that and you say you've done your job well, then it's been a good show. But no one's ever always going to be happy, and you just got to live with that.
So coming into year two, what adjustments and things have you done, having gone through the process last year, that is better preparing you for this year in Cleveland?
I think one has just been the benefit of more time and being able to look back on last year and say, okay, I know that I can be better technically speaking this year. In my preparation too, I've, just to give you an idea of how I prep, I've kept a Google document throughout the course of the year of storylines that I want to follow or articles or features that I thought were really good, where last year was admittedly a bit of a scramble down the stretch. And having 1 year under the belt is not just 1 year of a championship of knowing who did what in 2017, but also being able to grasp a better idea of, okay, what are the full stories of these programs and these coaches and these athletes. My favorite part in preparation, honestly, is the guys who are returning from last year, because they're they're familiar. And so it's not going back and digging through the entire backstory of Nathan Tomasello, but it's just adding on what happened from 2017 into 2018. And then in a small world situation too. So I live just west of Cleveland, and in settling here for my fiance's job, we're looking into buying a house. And so looking around for mortgage stuff, one of the mortgage brokers who I talked to wrestled at Oklahoma State and is good friends with Lee Kemp. And so, I spent 30 minutes on the phone with a mortgage broker who, and, I haven't bought a house yet, but we just spent 30 minutes talking about wrestling one night and about his time wrestling at Oklahoma State. And it's like, wow, this is a small world kind of thing where a year ago, I never would have imagined that A, I'd be looking into buying a house, but B, that I'd be talking about this with a mortgage broker in Cleveland. So all of those things go into it. And I think just having a year to be able to follow along with podcasts, whether it's yours or anybody else, and wrestling media, reading Win Magazine or whatever it might be, and having a full season to get all those things under your belt so that when you show up for that 3 days, it's not like, oh my God, I have this piece of information, but I forget where I saw it. And it just all comes a lot more naturally.
Showing up for those 3 days, what was your expectation going in? I mean, I guess you can have those conversations with Jerry and Adam about what to expect, but coming into a sport kind of blind and then seeing its championship, it's 3 days. It's, this is the best 3 days in college sports, at least in my opinion, is the NCAA Division I Wrestling Championships. And I say that as a fan of all sports, but can you really kind of expect what you're seeing until you actually experience it?
No, there's really not a good comparison, because even though each session is sold out, and even though there's a ton of juice in the building, around the building, at hotels and restaurants, during the course of the broadcast, you're not as amped up as you would be, say, during a 2-hour basketball game or during a 4-hour football game. And you have to know when to, in essence, take your shots as an announcer with your excitement. And so we go on the air the first day, you're on for 3 hours, you take a little break, you're back on for 3 hours at night. And it's a lot more conversation during that first day. And then things get amped up for day 2, and then you're down that side for day 3. And I think each day brought new surprises for me, because it was really having to get a feeling for when are things going to ramp up. And then you get to Saturday night and you realize, holy cow, this is it. And I walked away from being Matt's side last year after, the first 2 days we were up in St. Louis in the hockey press box, and I almost felt like I could have brought binoculars last year. But to be there and know that, hey, I don't need to bring my all every moment for this, because sometimes in broadcasting, as strange as it might sound to the non-initiated, saying nothing is sometimes the best thing you can do. So like last year after Imar got pinned, you don't have to say anything, because the moment speaks for itself, especially, once you've set up the story and people understand what's at stake there and how monumental that was, you just say nothing. So, the first couple of days are a lot of back and forth banter. And then day 3 is, I'm going to set up the moment, let the guys handle the X's and O's of it and nail that big moment. And then the crowd takes over from there. And so I just thought it was really cool that you have people coming in from all over the country. And I remember flying home on Sunday morning, and the entire St. Louis airport, gate to gate, is just people wearing wrestling gear and people who you can tell were coming back from the tournament. And so it's really cool to be a very small part of that, because other championships are one day and one game, and this is an entire weekend where people aren't necessarily there. You know, you have somebody who you might be rooting for, but what everybody really wants is just good matches throughout, where it's not Alabama versus Clemson and it's my team versus your team as much as it is we're here for the love of the sport, and we want to see the best people do what they do over the course of 7 minutes.
When you have conversations on the road and people say, "Oh, wait, you were covering NCAA wrestling," what was that like? I mean, how do you explain that to your colleagues in the industry?
I think basically in a similar sense to what I just said is that, like, A, it's a huge learning curve, and B, you need to go to really understand it. You could watch it on TV or you could hear me talk about it, but there's no substitute for being there. And when I started learning about wrestling, when I got the assignment last January and I was living in Chicago, I went to a Northwestern Michigan State duel, and I sat next to the SID, and I probably bombarded him for the entire time with some really dumb beginner questions. But one of the things that I learned right away, and I went down to their room as they were getting ready for the match, was understanding the preparation that goes into it and seeing these guys after they made weight scarf down food. And that was the first window that I got into the true dedication of what goes into it. And that was small. That was a 20-minute visit. But when I see people talk about in interviews, living the right lifestyle and really being dedicated to your craft, that was what I started to understand. And it's not to say that athletes in other sports aren't performing at high levels, but it being such an individual sport, how much mental toughness it takes, that, you need to be immersed really to understand exactly how it goes. And so I feel like when I tell people, they go, "Oh, okay, like maybe I'll check that out." But until you're really inside and seeing it, that it doesn't truly make sense to anybody until they're there.
I'm going to shift gears and come back to your preparation. Of course, this is kind of a pat on the back self-sales pitch here. I've provided an NCAA Division I championship preview guide to ESPN for their mat side broadcasters and their announcers. And I just want to get your take on this guide. And those of you listening that might be waffling is like, should I buy this thing? What's your opinion on how this thing can prepare a fan or another broadcaster, radio guy sitting there on press row for the NCAA Division I championships?
Well, for full transparency, I was honored that you asked for my feedback on the team pages last week to look at that. So I'm pulling up this email right now, and you sent over a team page that has bio information on it. It's got each roster and weight and wrestler and hometown and conference record and their high school. And then so my suggestion was on there, part of my preparation, I keep a giant Microsoft Word document with in each weight class about 12 to 15 guys. So I think we're going to be talking about the most throughout the course of the year. So my notes include, where did he go to high school? How did he do in high school? What were his choices going to college? Why did he end up at this school? What kind of music does he listen to? Anything that might be pertinent throughout the course of the tournament. But also the other thing that you're going to add in there also for people in this guide is, what have they done previously? And that's another important part too. Is he a first-time qualifier? Is he a 3-time All-American? How many national championships has he won? What's this school's most recent national champion? Those are all things that, instead of, what it takes me months to do over the course of time leading up to the tournament, everybody can have in one page. You don't have to pull out your phone or your iPad or your computer to Google it. You look at the guide, you instantly know who you're looking at here, and then records and matchups. To have that all in one place is, I think, invaluable. I know I'm going to have it as a PDF on my laptop during the course of the weekend. And so if anybody has never gotten it or is thinking about getting it, it's everything you need all in one place. And that makes life very, very easy.
MatTalkOnline.com/FanGuide18. Use the offer code podcast to save yourself $5 on it. Now that sales pitch is out of the way, we're going to circle back to, broadcasting as a whole, where your career is going to go. I also noticed that you've done some work with the Big Ten Network while with ESPN. How does that type of thing work when you're working for two different networks? I've kind of, that one kind of like maybe go, how's that work?
Yeah, I worked with BTN before I became full-time with ESPN. So living in Fort Wayne, I was able to make a stop in over at the BTN offices and set up a meeting and just kind of pitch myself and say, hey, if you need anything, I'm around. So in the you never know where opportunity will knock department, I had done a little bit of volleyball broadcasting while I was in college. And so one of the questions that I got asked when I was at BTN was, had you ever done volleyball before? And they didn't ask how much have you done or have you done it well? So fortunately, my only answer was yes, because I probably hadn't done it very well previously. And so I got in and on back-to-back days did a volleyball match at Ohio State, and then drove and the next day did one at Rec Hall at Penn State. And then from there, they gave me women's basketball. Then from there, they gave me men's basketball. And so I was kind of balancing a freelance schedule back and forth between the Big Ten Network and between ESPN. And, there's a lot of people who do work freelance because they have so many opportunities with different networks. And, if you work for Westwood One, you could be over in Korea doing the Olympics right now. So it's hard to do because you want to say yes to everything and you never want to say no, but at the same time, you don't want to make anybody mad. So I'm fortunate that I'm able to work for one network that's really great and that has a lot of rights to do a lot of things. But it was fun because ultimately you're going to cross paths with people again in a small business like this. So it was good to meet a lot of people very early on in my career.
Tell me about doing play-by-play for the Ultimate Frisbee National Championships.
Oh, I was hoping this would come up. That was another deal back in 2013.
That's also broadcasting research, so I can relate. So, yeah.
This was back in 2013. Instead of a text message, this came via email. Do you know anything about Ultimate Frisbee? And the answer was no, but I'm willing to learn. And so I did. And I was very fortunate, as I have been with wrestling, to get paired with a great partner who also has done play-by-play. And my partner there was Evan Lepler, who is widely known in the Ultimate community as the voice of Ultimate. Evan was working in minor league baseball at the time as well in Salem, Virginia for the Salem Red Sox, and has since quit that job to do Ultimate broadcasting full time. And there are two professional Ultimate leagues. It's semi-pro. Nobody really does it for a full living, but he travels somewhere every Saturday across the continent because they even go to Canada and is doing Ultimate play-by-play. He played at Wake Forest, and he's also doing college basketball now for Raycom Sports. So he's doing the ACC men's and women's basketball. And so it was another similar thing where it's like you dive in head first, try and learn literally everything you can. And once the broadcast starts, you go and you do the best that you can. The hardest part about that, I think, was that the college, so we did some college and some semi-pro on ESPN3, but the college teams are not licensed to use their school nicknames. So Iowa, the women's team name is not the Hawkeyes, but it's Saucy Nancy. So they can basically come up with any nickname they want. Oregon's women's team name was not the Ducks, but Fugue. And there's a deeper meaning behind that word. So not only are you learning a new sport with new names, but you also then have to know, well, this team's nickname isn't what I've thought it was for the first 2 decades of my life. So it's fun because it's something that I still follow from a distance and keep up with. And is an experience that I know that 99% of people who do play-by-play will never have.
Yeah, I'm just curious on whether or not Cleveland State has an Ultimate team and where they can take that nickname. We'll just leave that to your imagination. But having done PA for roller derby, I can definitely relate with the team names over the years, and of course the player names. But other places that broadcasting has taken you, I remember when I was a kid, my goal was to be one of the most recognizable voices in sports broadcasting. I've got that in wrestling. I don't have that overall, but the name Vern Lundquist is one that I've always tried to follow in terms of being multifaceted and being able to, you can put him in the Masters and you can put him in SEC football and, you can put him in Happy Gilmore. I mean, the guy has that voice and that tone and that presence that I want to see as a viewer if Vern Lundquist is on, I don't care what it is, I'm watching it. And who did you kind of try to model your career after, and what goals do you still have to accomplish here in broadcasting?
Well, I know I'm going to leave people off of this list, but there's a couple guys who I could think of right off the top of my head who I just love. I think, Dan Shulman, for one, who just stepped back as the voice of Sunday Night Baseball on ESPN and is the lead announcer on college basketball. When you grow up, you think about the people whose voices strike you the most before you even think about the content. And Dan Shulman just has this voice that is like from God. And it actually, you have that voice too, as the PA during the NCAA championships, I should say. It's very booming. So kudos to you. But,
I'm just going to take that clip and repeat it over and over and over again. Yeah. Not to interrupt. That's bad radio. That's bad podcasting. But yeah, continue. You can tell me more about me if you want, but no, I'm interested in what you've got here. So keep going.
The Jason Bryant fawning hour continues. To have a voice like that, there's nothing that you do to get that. You're just born with that. And I thought for a long time, like, wow, I've really got to try to sound like that. But ultimately, you can't be somebody you're not. You have to be who you are. And so I think even for the early portions of my career, I tried to sound like what I thought an announcer should sound like, rather than sounding like who I am. And so, but Dan is just so calm, and he nails all the big calls, and he's very smart and sharp, as is Ian Eagle, I think, too. And Ian does not have a deep voice, but he's very witty. He always has a good one-liner, and it's not like it's cheap humor, like it's smart humor. There's a funny clip on YouTube where he's the voice of the Brooklyn Nets on TV, and there's a player who hits a game winner, and then all of a sudden the director cuts to a shot of Jerry Seinfeld in the audience, and he goes, "That was real, and it was spectacular." And if you don't get the Seinfeld reference, I'm not going to get into it. You can figure it out. But I mean, just to be able to have your mind work like that is really good. And so I like to inject humor when appropriate. So that's somebody who I look up to. And then Al Michaels is another guy who does Sunday Night Football on NBC, the most watched sports show on TV every year. And Al is so good because not only has he been doing it for so long, but he makes it sound effortless. And not that I'm going to try and say like working this job is like difficult in terms of if you're doing construction, because that's obviously much harder, but there's a lot going on. You've got somebody talking in your ear. You've got 22 players on the field. You've got an analyst talking to you, and you're trying to keep everything in perspective. And Al makes it sound like it's effortless, and it's not. And so to be able to just sit down and make it sound like he just showed up and already knows everything, that's somebody that I emulate too, of all those aspects of people. So, I'm 29 now, and I've been doing this for, going back to college, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 years. And I think I'm still figuring out and becoming comfortable with who I am and how I work best with different analysts. And so it takes a while to really be, not as a broadcaster, but just as a grown human being, comfortable with who you are. And so that's something that's taken me a while to find, but having those people who are doing it before you and people who you can look up to is certainly a nice, something that's always good to aspire to, because, I'm doing college basketball now. I'm doing college baseball. I just, for the first time this past summer on the radio, did Major League Baseball. So there's always more stuff I want to do, but I think, if I never called a World Series, or I never called a Super Bowl, or I never called, the pinnacle of any sport, I'd still be really happy with what I'm doing today, because it's something that I love to do. And I know that not everybody gets to do something they enjoy every day. And so I think about it in terms of, I could be, when I lived in Vermont, as you mentioned, I worked in a call center, and I didn't like that job. So I know that I could be working a job that I don't like. And fortunately, I have one that I love.
One thing that people don't understand about live television until they actually maybe experience it is the sensation that comes over you, maybe the tightness in your chest when you're looking at a camera and that red light turns on. What was that experience like for you the first time?
You don't know when to look at the camera, am I supposed to smile? How long do I smile? When do I look at the analyst? When am I not on camera anymore so I can scratch that itch above my right eye? I mean, there are just so many things where you're like, what do I do? It's not natural to just look at a camera and smile and nod your head. So there's part of it you just have to get over, because like I have the type of face in general where it looks like I'm sad all the time, even though I'm not. It's just my general disposition. There's a name for it that is probably not family friendly, which I'm sure some people know. But yeah, I don't look like I'm happy all the time, even if I'm perfectly happy inside. So you have to smile maybe a little bit wider than you would all the time. And that's just part of TV, because when you're walking past somebody and they smile at you, it's hard not to smile back. So when you see somebody on TV and they smile, you say, oh, well, I think I like what's going on here. So it was definitely weird the first time that it happened. And I don't know that it's ever natural to be on camera, because it's a little bit of a performance, sure, where you want people to be engaged with what you're doing. But I still get that rush every time you're getting a countdown. Hey, 1 minute to air, 30 seconds, 15, have a good show. There's one producer who always made me laugh. He'd say 5 seconds. Okay, don't say, and then the F word. And then everybody cracks up and you're automatically smiling before you go on the air. So yeah, if you don't get nervous, I think that'd be bad, because that means that you care about what you're doing, that it's important to you. So there's always a little bit of butterflies in that moment right before you come on the air.
I remember doing a game. I was doing some women's college basketball when I was a student at Old Dominion, and it was a tape delay game. And so we had snow that night. So after it was Old Dominion and George Mason, and the game is over. I come back to my house. One of the field hockey players is having a birthday party. The snow is coming down. So guess what? There's going to be no school tomorrow. And I know that's foreign for you being in Syracuse, where 2 feet of snow, we're still going to class. But so we got a snow day. So we're going out, we're partying. And the next thing you know, they turn the game on. And there it is. We're all hanging around watching TV. Next thing you know, I hear my voice coming from the television. What was it like the first time you actually watched a game that you were calling with somebody that didn't know it was you on the call?
There are people who will go, that didn't sound like you. Or other people who will go, hey, do your TV voice. And I'm like, I don't have a TV voice. So, that's one of the things about broadcasting in general, is that, if you're doing PA or I'm calling play-by-play of a game, are you using your regular indoor speaking voice? No. I mean, it's still you, but you're more enthusiastic. You're projecting your voice more. Instead of breathing from your throat, you're breathing from your belly, and you're pushing air a lot more through your diaphragm. And so there are people who go, wow, you sound so much older. And so I've gotten to the point now where, like, at first I thought, like, I was kind of insulted by it, but people are trying to say that as a compliment. And so I take it in stride. The first time you hear yourself, whether it's audio or on TV, it's just a weird experience, isn't it?
Yeah, there's points that I've kept a lot of videos over the years, and back then it was VHS. I remember watching that was one of my first TV games, and I'm like, oh, I can't watch it, or I'll go back and listen to myself, and I'm like, oh, that's good. And I'm just sitting there just cringing, because we're in an industry where you have to be your own biggest critic, and I'm sitting there watching. I think one of my best broadcasts was I was a sideline guy for the U.S. Open, and it was a finals, and we had Jordan Burroughs and Jake Varner coming off the mat, and it was live on NBC Universal, and it was one of those things. It's like, man, I think I really did a good job, and I'm going back and I twins there. Oh, I didn't leave the camera, so it's a little weird, but sometimes when you knock it out of the park, you just sit there and you're going to watch it over and over and over again, to the point where my wife was like, okay, yeah, when does this thing get off of ESPN3? Yeah, we know they introduced the PA with you on it. Okay, can we watch Big Brother now, please? But it's a different experience. I know that, and granted, I don't have that ESPN. Those 4 letters, they carry a lot of importance to people. So it's one of those things that you and Adam are both in the last 2 years we've had you guys on the show doing something I really wish that I would have had the opportunity to. I mean, it still might be there, but I love the sport of wrestling and what I'm doing. But I am still a little bit jealous of you guys, man, because I mean, you get to be the voice of the most iconic college wrestling tournament in the country. I mean, I'm in the background, but they're hearing you more than they're hearing me. So I'm just kind of like, I'm not empathetic in this regard. I'm like super happy for you guys that one, you've been very helpful over the years and appreciative of the work I've provided. And in fact, that you guys aren't DBs about it either. You're just fun guys that call sports and love what you're doing.
And what you just mentioned in terms of the number of people who see what Adam has done or what I've done or what Sean Kenny does in terms of calling wrestling, that's a great motivator for me every day, where I sit down and I put together my research and I go, hey, there's a lot of people out there who are watching, who love this sport, who would love to be doing what I'm doing. And I'm sure there are many people who say I could do a better job than he does. And so it's my job, I think, to serve the fan of wrestling or any sport in exactly the way that they should be, by doing the best job that I can possibly do and tell everyone's story and to be able to nail those big moments. Because there are guys who, when they win a national championship, we're creating the record of the biggest moment of their lives to that point, most likely. And so I want to be able to make it something that they can look back on, and not for my sake, because my voice is recorded along with the video, but that for them, when they watch it, that the production that we put together and the call that goes with it is fitting of the moment and for all of the work that's gone into it for those people. So there's always a motivation of, like, when I'm sitting down to do it, I'm nervous, and it's not just wrestling, but any sport, of like, did I miss a crucial story? Is there a stat that I need to know? It's kind of an inner working of the brain to say, I hope I got everything right, because you really want to nail the moment. And that's a big motivating factor every day with every broadcast.
Is it hard to try? I mean, we go back to the Miracle on Ice and Do You Believe in Miracles? That is an iconic sound clip. I mean, when somebody say, do you believe in miracles? You know exactly what sporting event they're talking about. You know exactly what year it happened. You know where it happened. You might not miss the fact that was not the final. That was like the semifinal. But, is it kind of hard to maybe stay away from a line like, oh, man, I got this set up. I think I know what I'm going to say when this guy happens. And 90% of the time, you end up forgetting saying it, or just it doesn't work. I mean, how do you balance a great call with an organically natural call?
Well, the only time I thought about that during last year's championship was when Bo Nickel won, and I'm thinking, oh man, he's going to be the fifth guy to win a championship. His last name is Nickel, and then I kind of had to punch myself and say, don't ruin it with some corny pun, and to try and stay away from that. Yeah, as far as, do I want to come in with like a scripted line, I never do want to do that, because I think it would take away from the authenticity of the moment. There have been times where I've written something down to say, just to, have not necessarily word for word, line for line what I would want to say, but to make sure I nail the bullet points. So, is it 5 titles in 6 years, or is it, an Olympic gold medalist adds another title to his shelf? Those are not things that I said, but just to make sure that you have those bullet points with you and let it come out organically, because I think that's the best. It gets the most emotion with it. I don't want to write anything down word for word, because then I feel like you'd have people sitting at home and going like, come on, man, really? And so am I going to have the perfect broadcast or come up with the perfect line every time? Absolutely not. That's part of what motivates you every time, is that there's no such thing as the perfect broadcast. You might have a great highlight, but there's never going to be a perfect broadcast. So I just try and trust my preparation and trust that I understand the gravity of the moment and let whatever flows forth from my mouth be the words of record.
Circling back to, again, some of your early career, and the word podcast has been pretty prominent on this show, because this is a podcast. This network is a podcast, but you've got some podcast experience. But I'm more interested in what you're listening to outside of the world of actually, the sports. I mean, what type of things are you trying to, when your wife says you can't watch sports on TV because, obviously your life is sports and you want maybe a grounding presence. What are some things that Mike Couzens likes to listen to when he's not thinking about his next gig and preparing for the NCAA Wrestling Championships?
That's a good question. I'm looking through my podcast right now on my phone, because I've got a lot of them that I subscribe to. One is, I guess this is kind of sports related, but it's also about writing, is one from Jeff Pearlman, who's the author. He interviews other writers. It's called Two Writers Slinging Yang. They just talk about their creative writing process.
That sounds safe
another
for work
one I
just on the
to,
title.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Another one is Fresh Air from Terry Gross on NPR, and so she just interviews tons of different people. Freakonomics Radio, I like, from NPR, that takes kind of like a fun look at economic stuff. Planet Money is another one from NPR that's kind of in a similar vein. I am subscribed to the Short Time Wrestling podcast.
Woohoo!
I've got Stay Tuned with Preet, which is from the former district attorney from the Southern District of New York. I've got the Axe Files from David Axelrod. Can you tell that I like politics a little bit? And those are all the podcasts that I listen to. And then I'll be honest, my personal aspiration is to read more during my busy season from, let's say, the middle of August to May, and I don't always get around to as many books as I'd like. You ever listen to an audiobook and then feel awkward saying that you read it when you really didn't read it?
Yeah, I hear people say, "Oh yeah, I read that last week off Audible." I'm like, "Wait a minute, I don't know."
Yeah,
I tried one audiobook and I'm looking like 8 hours, please. And then I realized that I listen to 20 hours of podcasts a week in addition to what I'm producing. So reading more is definitely. I got a pile of 8 wrestling books I still need to read this year. And I'm like, oh man, when am I gonna have time to read these things?
I know. So it's with the 20 hours, you're like, well, if I just segmented the audiobook, I could have been done already. But I listened to the book United by the senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, and kind of his life story, how he went from living in northern New Jersey to being the senator from New Jersey. And then I'm listening to a book right now called Undeniable by Bill Nye about evolution. So I do try and veer away from sports when I'm not talking about sports, but I think sometimes it's hard, which sounds dumb because sports is most people's diversion, but for us it's work. But if you really want to be the best at something, it almost in a way does become your life. So last night, we're making dinner and I go, I'll be right back. And I go put on the Duke and North Carolina basketball game because, or not a Duke and, or North Carolina and Notre Dame. Sorry, I'm getting keep my game straight at this point. But most of my basketball games are within the ACC. So it's like, am I watching this for leisure or am I watching this because I want to take mental notes for work? And so sometimes the lines do kind of blur in there. And then things slow down a little bit over the summer. So I read a book about how you can retire at age 55 last summer. And even though that's at best 25 years away, 26 years away from me, and it was interesting to me to read about the stock market and different investment vehicles. But yeah, a lot of the time, even during quote unquote free time, it's still focused on sports, which I guess there are worse things that I could do with my time.
Yeah, one tip for podcasts, I use Overcast, so that has a smart speed, and I go about 1.7, so I can zip through an hour episode in about 40 minutes without it being too bad.
Do you get mouse voice though in that?
No, this app doesn't. It cuts out a lot of the gaps, so it's a little faster, but it doesn't go like this. It's a little faster. It's like the Micro Machine guy, but you can slow it down so it's not nearly as fast. So if those of you are listening at 2x speed, when I just tried that, you're not going to hear any of that. And as far as I'm with you on that. The other night, Sunday night, I'm sitting there. I've got my tablet open watching Ohio State and Michigan cooking dinner. It's just and my wife's and I'm critiquing the broadcast while I'm also interested in Snyder and Kuhn and Amin and Jordan. And it's just there's that line where I'm fortunate enough to cover a sport I love, but that also does interfere with I'm not watching wrestling right now because I really want to watch this episode of Top Chef.
It's amazing that we've found people who are not only willing to stick around with us, but also live with us and put up with this madness.
Yeah, especially, right now, my wife, when April 13th rolls around, it's probably going to be one of the greatest days of my wife's life because that means I would have made it a full year of wearing a different wrestling shirt a day. I'm at like day 307 right now. She's like, what are you going to do with all these shirts? She's waiting for this thing to be over. So we are.
I have some questions about this.
Okay.
This morning Twitter routine that you have. A, how much space do the shirts take up? And B, what was the genesis of Shirt a Day?
Okay, so see, this is a good broadcaster. He's turning the questions around on the host. So the shirts, a lot of them now are that really like light tri-blends, so they don't take up nearly as much room as like the super thick Gildans or the Hanes Beefy tee. But I have some stacked up on a shelf in the top shelf of the closet. I have a full dresser downstairs in our basement storage room that's pretty much packed to the gills. Then I've got a pile of shirts I'm probably going to donate because as much as I like them, the designs probably aren't wear again. They look pretty good, but I'm a sucker for a fundraiser too. So they're over there. And then, of course, I've got the drawer of shirts that I haven't worn yet. Then below that is the drawer of shirts I want to wear again because I like them, but I can't wear them yet. And then the third drawer below that in our main bedroom is the long sleeve shirts that here in Minnesota are kind of gold. But the genesis of the idea, I think I'm on day 308 right now, is a couple years ago in Fargo, a couple of the wrestling media guys that were out there, I think it was Earl Smith that talked about it, Willie, and Christian from Flow, myself. There was like 5 of us. It's like, hey, let's do this wrestling shirt today and take a picture and see how long we can go. And that made it about 12 days because we were in Fargo and, whoever the last man standing was won. And after about 12 days, I won because I was the only one aware enough to like take a picture of my shirt and post it on Twitter that day. And there couldn't be repeats, which was tough for the Flow guys in Fargo because they were all wearing the same Flow wrestling shirts, over and over. I mean, it's the same. It was a different shirt, but it was the same design. You can't be like, I have a gray Matt Talk shirt. I can't wear another gray Matt Talk shirt and do it. So I started it up again. We've had about 20, 25 people throughout the course of the year kind of play along with it. And Joe Caprino from Indiana Matt was the last guy hanging with me. We made it to about day 180 before he went on a cruise with his wife. And he was off the grid. He had no cell phone coverage. So I basically officially won. But at that point, I was like, well, I looked at Troy, I was like, might as well see how far I can keep going. So it's not like I'm either going to I'm stopping at a year or when I run out, whichever comes first. So that's kind of how it happened. And at this point, I'm pot invested, man. I just got to see this thing through. And I've bought some shirts and I've been sent some shirts and I've rocked some school right now as I record this. Scott City Wrestling in Iowa is the winner. They're the Beavers. That's the one I'm wearing today as I record this. And yesterday was Edinburgh, and it's pretty much a game time decision on which one I wear each morning.
It is notable that here we are, 3:09 Eastern time on Tuesday, February 13th. No shirt post on Twitter yet today.
Yeah, because I had to get the coaches poll out. I've got the picture taken. I took the picture before I put my daughter on the bus for kindergarten this morning. It's sitting there on my phone, but I had to get the coaches poll out. Had to put out another fire, and then not literally. I'm watching the kids by myself this week, so while my wife's on business. So putting out a fire means something completely different than normally when I would be watching the kids because I might actually have to put out a fire. But yeah, it'll be coming soon.
I'm used to about the first time I look at my phone every day that I've got around 7:05 your email every morning, your newsletter, and then when I look at Twitter, that your beautiful visage is usually staring right back at me on my phone.
Well, and don't forget the weather update.
Right. It may be freezing cold in New Brighton, but you always have time for short time.
Because everybody knows where I live because of my tweets. So let's see. You know what? Because again, this is that visual radio or visual podcasting. You don't want to do something that your listener cannot see you do. Kind of back on that radio thing. I'm gonna live tweet this right now, and let's see. Talking with, and I'm gonna, and this is also a plug to follow Mike on Twitter at Mike Couzens. That's Couzens. And how many times has that been misspelled over your career?
Less misspelled, but more mispronounced as like Couzens or Couzens, which always baffles me because like Cousins, your relative, is spelled the same way, C-O-U, and my name is C-O-U. But then all of a sudden, people decide that it should be a French pronunciation. So you just roll with it sometimes.
Cousins. Perhaps?
Yeah, no. But it's actually of English etymology, so I'm not really sure how it all gets messed up. Are you excited to come to Cleveland? Because you'll be one of the people that doesn't have to worry about changing their wardrobe to be here?
Well, here's the thing. I will actually have to wear the shirt and then get into the shirt and tie because we are wearing shirt, ties, and jackets at the NCAA Division I championships. I will actually be in Cleveland the week before, too, announcing the Division III championships. So I get 2 straight weekends in the city that rocks.
You're going to get the lay of the land. And I think, I haven't lived in Cleveland for a year yet, but I think that it does get a bad rap nationally. And I think that if people really do, now granted, I can't guarantee that it's going to be particularly warm for the Division I championships, but if people go out and explore, I think you'll find certainly, if you're not in the arena, plenty of great restaurants in downtown Cleveland. And, if that's all you do while you're here, I think you will not be disappointed. So, don't let what other people have said prejudice you against Cleveland, because I find it to be a great place to live.
I've actually had a lot of good times in Cleveland. I think the 99 Junior Olympics were there. I remember the National Duels there one year. This was actually not a good story about Cleveland, but it was so cold that one January at National Duels in 2004, I got the chapped lip. And then, when the wind blows, you lick your lips because they're chapped. The next thing you know, they exploded into one just gigantically gross cold sore. It was just, I remember just the chapped lips so bad in that Cleveland in 2004. The flats were closed then. I think they're open back up. And then the warehouse district, I don't know. There's some cool spots down there. I know that we're going to try to have our media association social at the Winking Lizard. There's 2 locations for that. But we know you had your production meeting right next to our media association meeting last year in St. Louis. And maybe we'll touch base again before the tournament starts. But for now, Mike Couzens, we've talked a lot about a bunch of different things. Last thing we've got for you as I tweet the photo, there it is for the world to see. Scott City Wrestling gets the wrestling shirt of the day for 308. Mike Couzens is tagged. What are you most forward to seeing in Cleveland this year?
Wow. I haven't thought about that yet. I think what I'm most looking forward to is somebody who is kind of counted out, and I don't know what weight class it would be, but somebody who's coming in and you're thinking, I didn't think they'd be here, whether it's somebody who's unseeded or somebody who's a really high seed and kind of making a run for it. And then I am looking forward to also, after this past week, seeing what happens at 285 and what happens with Kyle Snyder. That is of great interest to me.
So your thoughts now? How you get? I mean, now it almost sets the stage perfectly for you because Snyder and Kuhn could meet the Big Ten finals, and say Snyder gets that one. There could be the rubber match to winner take all. Could be a national championship. I mean, the drama's unfolding perfectly for you and the production squad there at ESPN.
That's all I need is you set me up with good storylines, and then the action on the mat takes care of itself. Who doesn't like to have all the work done for them before they show up, right?
Yeah, that's the way I like to do it. So that being said, where can people find more about you? Of course, they can follow you on Twitter at Mike Couzens, again, Couzens, not Cousin. And if they're interested in what you're doing, actually, I got to stop. I'm closing the show too early because I want to give you that voice of God on your end now. I'm in the Minneapolis airport, heading to Texas to do this movie scene with Dan Gable about beginning of January. And as I'm waiting at the bar, at the gate, the hotel bar, I'm having a nice Minnesota craft beer. I hear this voice just after the North Dakota State James Madison FCS championship game goes off. And I hear, from the carrier, I was like, holy crap, that's Mike Couzens. So there you go. Your voice of God moment was as I was in the airport and Syracuse is playing Notre Dame on basketball just after I watched North Dakota State beat the pukes of James Madison. So there was my
So
Mike
what
Couzens.
You're saying is you needed to be sedated by hops and barley in order to withstand hearing my voice. Is that what you're saying?
I needed hops and barley to withstand James Madison because they cut wrestling. You were actually a nice refresher after North Dakota State won the game. And then I was like, oh, cool. It's my friend Mike. And I'm like standing here by myself. Like, I only had one beer for the record. I'm looking around going, nobody gives a crap that that's my friend on the TV. So anyway, so that was my like voice of God moment where I hear when I hear Adam Amin or something when I'm walking through an airport, I'm like, hey, I know that guy. It's not like you hear Vern Lundquist to be like, I like that guy. It doesn't have the same effect.
And then 2 hours later, I got engaged. So it was a pretty big day.
Oh, wow. That same day.
Yeah, I proposed to my now fiance at the Carrier Dome following a Syracuse basketball game that I was announcing.
And it was the Notre Dame game.
Yeah. So hopefully I've got not only the luck of my alma mater, but the luck of the Irish with me after that.
All right, that's a cool story, because I was actually had down as a question that I was going to get to, because we've gone off the rails so many different places here, because we're just talking about sports and broadcasting. But I just thought it was cool. It's like, oh man, how does he handle broadcasting at his alma mater? That's another thing for another time, because you'll be on the show again. Mike Couzens, we'll let you roll. We'll see you in Cleveland, third weekend of March. Bring your Irish for St. Patty's Day as we close out the finals.
Yeah, and my French, Couzens. We'll have all nationalities represented. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Hey, my pleasure. The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Clothing. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. First time listening? Well, you can change that by going to MattTalkOnline.com/GetShortTime to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, or listen on your favorite podcatcher at MattTalkOnline.com/listen.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.